Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Carlisle, and I am a second-year doctoral student at the University of Virginia. And my advisor is Michael Kennedy, and I am also co-presenting this on behalf of my two colleagues, Victoria Van Eidert, who is a third-year doctoral student with the same advisor, and Sean McDonald, who is a first-year doctoral student also with the same advisor. So for this project titled Supporting Minoritized Racial Ethnic Students with Learning Disabilities in Inclusive Science Classrooms, the whole purpose behind this, or the rationale, was really that when we think about science performance and supporting marginalized students in achieving greater gains, it becomes increasingly important to consider as knowledge about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is increasingly important for upward mobility in today's world. But unfortunately, when we have students who face multiple marginalized identities, a concept referred to as intersectionality, differences in achievement and progress toward better outcomes becomes even more troubling because the interplay among these characteristics is rarely accounted for in quantitative intervention research. So the purpose of this study was to evaluate whether a multimedia professional development program called CAP-PD, when implemented with inclusive middle school science teachers, whether it impacted the general and vocabulary specific science knowledge of students with specific learning disabilities from marginalized racial and ethnic backgrounds. And I'm going to zoom in here to show our research questions a little bit more up close. So our specific research questions were, do students with specific learning disabilities from marginalized racial ethnic backgrounds demonstrate greater achievement on science vocabulary CBMs when compared to their peers with the same intersectional identities after receiving instruction in CAP-PD classrooms versus comparison condition. And then likewise, same population, same comparison here, but do we see the same type of gains on a standardized measure of general science knowledge? And that measure was called the Mozart. So scrolling down here, I also have some notes included about the specific components of the CAP-PD intervention process. So it had 3 different components, which really included these multimedia vignettes called CAP TVs that provide teachers with instruction in evidence-based practices. And I have a link here to take you to one of those, to an example of one of the HLP videos, which some of you may be familiar with, which describe some of those practices in more detail. And then instructional slides called Content Acquisition Podcast for Students. And these are just instructional slides that can be used with students when providing vocabulary instruction. They incorporate some elements such as student-friendly definitions, examples and non-examples, morphological word instruction, and things of that nature, and paired with large high-resolution images, and really making vocabulary visible to students and connecting it to a lot of different familiar modes. And then finally, there was the coaching emails that incorporated detailed feedback related to specific teacher moves, and data was collected there with the classroom teaching scan. And I have a couple of examples linked in here that show the classroom teaching scan along with a coaching email that teachers would have received. So scrolling over to our other side for our method, this was a cluster randomized design, and there were 2 different measures that were utilized with students, and teachers were randomly assigned to treatment or comparison conditions. The comparison condition was not a typical business as usual type of comparison. This was teachers in the comparison condition were actually provided with those CAPS instructional slides. They just weren't provided with any of the instruction from the CAP TVs in what the evidence-based practices are, and they didn't receive any of the coaching components either. The whole purpose behind that was strictly just to help with reducing the potential for attrition. So trying to avoid teachers seeing that some teachers within the same school building were receiving these, awesome instructional slides to use with their students, and, then potentially leaving the study in the event of getting frustrated that they weren't receiving the same thing. So providing the instructional slides helped control for that. And then the students naturally nested within teachers' classrooms, participated in whatever condition their teacher was assigned to. So for CAP PD and comparison for teachers, we had 13 and 13, split even. For students with specific learning disabilities, since that was the focus of analysis here, all other students in the sample were dropped, and we were just looking at students with specific learning disabilities and whether or not they were from a minoritized racial ethnic background or if they were white. And so we had 77 total students in the CAP PD condition, with 10 of them being from minoritized racial ethnic backgrounds, 67 from white, and 69 in the comparison condition, with 9 being from minoritized racial ethnic backgrounds and 60 of them being white. And for our measures, we had 3 researcher-developed vocabulary curriculum-based measures. There were 20 multiple choice items that were randomly drawn vocabulary terms from each grade level curricula. And I have reliability scores reported there. And then there was also a standardized measure called the Misconceptions Oriented Standard-Based Assessment Resources for Teachers. That is a measure that was developed by Stanford University, and students completed the astronomy, space, physical, and life science Mozart assessments as pre and post test measures. So that pre-test measure was actually used as a covariate across all models to control for differences between student performance that had pre-existed at pre-test. And then to answer our research questions here, a series of multi-level random intercept models were used across all the assessments. And, oh, that is a typo there. This was just for one intersectional student group. And that was students with learning disabilities, specific learning disabilities from minoritized racial ethnic backgrounds. All right. So for the results, we can see here that when you look at that interaction between group assignment and minoritized racial ethnic status of the students with specific learning disabilities, we do see that there was a slight increase from that mean value across CBM1 and CBM2. These are the vocabulary curriculum-based measures. And however, that increase was not statistically significant. But we do also see that we had decreasing student level variance and increasing teacher level variance. So that is showing us here that while students were increasing their performance, we were also seeing a change in the differences, the amount of difference between teachers, suggesting that CAP PD was indeed supporting teachers in supporting students. Then when we come down here, again, it was not statistically significant for CBM3. It actually went down a little bit from CBM2, which was definitely one interesting finding to come across here. And a big difference, which I placed a star next to here, is that for the standardized measure, typically you would see that you would see larger gains on a researcher developed measure, such as those curriculum-based measures. But in this case, we actually saw the largest gain for this group of intersectional students on the standardized measure of general science knowledge. So our mean on this measure was, for students with specific learning disabilities from minoritized racial ethnic backgrounds, was 21.1. And when you look at the performance of that intersectional group of students in the CAP PD classrooms, we saw gains of an average of 12.17 points. So pretty large. So as I was going through those tables here, I basically summarized these exact results that I have bulleted out at the bottom. But I do want to mention that it does definitely appear that students with intersectional identities, including specific learning disabilities and marginalized racial ethnic backgrounds, they did appear to benefit from instruction that was facilitated by the CAP PD intervention process when compared to their peers with the same intersectional identities in comparison classrooms. But importantly, I would like to recognize that a major limitation to this study was that no social validity measure was ever conducted. So the whole purpose behind intersectionality is to bring the voices of those who have been marginalized out of the margins. And unfortunately, by failing to collect social validity data, that student level voice of whether or not they found the intervention to be valid and helpful for their learning is definitely lacking. Additionally, we should also consider ways that we can more purposely integrate culturally responsive practices. As we were looking at some culturally responsive recommendations for vocabulary instruction, we did see quite a bit of overlap in the way that the instructional slides that were used with students coincide with some of those culturally responsive recommendations, such as chunking information into smaller parts, providing morphological instruction, giving clear examples and non-examples, and connecting it to students' backgrounds and reviewing prior knowledge that is necessary for new learning to occur. However, a major thing that is common among collectivist cultural traditions is to incorporate team-based collaborative activities where students can really talk through and make sense of new information together in a collaborative way. So incorporating some team-based activities, for example, would be one way that we could definitely strengthen the student level materials. And then we would also really like to support the validity of this intervention by implementing it with a larger sample of students who face multiple marginalizations through sociocultural identities. So thanks so much for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed this presentation, and it has been my pleasure to speak with you. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.